a ceasefire between Ukraine and Russia. So let's listen to this.
Security and defence analyst Michael Clark is here with me to discuss the significance of all of this. Michael, good morning to you. Good to see you. So firstly, what did you make of what Mark Rutte was saying?
Yeah, I mean, what he's saying in public now for the first time is, we're pretty sure, is what he said to Donald Trump on the 22nd of November, which is that the Europeans are going to make a bigger contribution to all things NATO, but that we've got to be prepared to be tough with Putin. And I think he was saying to Trump, we know, that if it looks as if you've rolled over and given Putin what he wants, then it's not a great way to start your presidency looking like a sucker to a playground bully like Putin. And it will actually embolden all of your enemies. It will embolden China and North Korea and Iran.
That's a very interesting analysis, and I do think that is something to consider if you're on Trump's side, is that you are currently being depicted from the MAGA side as a strong leader that people fear, that people respect, that people take seriously. If you go into a negotiation where Putin, for the most part, gets everything that he wanted, now you can argue, does he get everything? He doesn't get all of Ukraine. Well, if he gets a large chunk of Ukraine and prevents them from joining NATO, I mean, this is a win-win for Putin. So there still needs to be that vigor, that strength that we're led to believe that Donald Trump has to make sure that the deal is fair for both sides. But let's continue.
So you've got to play it tough. And the phrase is also escalate to de-escalate. You've actually got to put Putin under enough pressure to bring him to the table, because at the moment, statements coming out of the Kremlin, or statements around the Kremlin, people who are speaking as if on behalf of the Kremlin, indicate that Putin may overplay his hand. So they're being very assertive. Russian statements are very assertive that we want a bigger deal than just Ukraine. We want to see NATO push back. We want security guarantees. We want Zelensky out of it completely. All of that is going to be unacceptable. And Rutte, I think, is setting out what the Europeans think they could contribute.
That's another very interesting point in terms of not only Putin and Russia's relationship with Ukraine and ensuring that Ukraine doesn't kind of go over the line past what Putin wants, but also take into consideration, but because of how people like Joe Rogan, who are scared chickens, who think that Putin is going to blow everybody up, he is frightening people like Rogan all across the board that World War III happened because of his nuclear technology. Knowing full well if Putin used nuclear technology, he's cooked too. It doesn't make sense for him to actually use it. With that said, because of that fear, and because of that sentiment that is especially growing on the MAGA side, Putin and his side will think that they have the leverage to not only demand stuff from Ukraine, but also demand stuff from NATO, saying, well, if you don't do what I want, I'm going to send a nuke. It's the same thing as a child who looks at their parents and just not listening, and the child said, well, if you don't do what I say, if you do this, blah, 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 I'm running away. It's the same type of principle. It's just up to Donald Trump to see if he's going to really bite or not. We shall see.
And what the lines should be. The world is converging very vaguely at the moment on some sort of truce sometime in the new year. It's pretty vague at the moment, lots of ideas around, which we could talk about. We're not clear what this would look like, even if all parties agree. But we're beginning to converge on the idea that there will be a ceasefire sometime in the new year.
As you said, lots of ideas around, one of them coming out of Stuart's interview with Zelensky last week. How easy is it? How quick would it be? And how likely is it that there would be a NATO security guarantee of the ground that Ukraine still holds today?
There won't be NATO membership, and that's for sure. But Zelensky is saying we have to have NATO membership because we have to have Article 5, the Article 5 guarantee that an attack on one is an attack on all. But there are a lot of ideas going around to say, well, supposing you have bilateral guarantees, and here we get to the real meat of it, supposing British and French and German and other troops, even Polish troops, were involved in holding a line, a ceasefire line, and there would be, in effect, a tripwire. The Economist was talking about this rather cleverly last week. It would be a tripwire. So it looked like it would be an Article 5 guarantee in all but name. Question there is, are we brave enough to do it? Would we do it and would we mean it? So people are exploring ideas. You can't have NATO membership, but maybe we can give you some sort of arrangement that will be as good as that guarantee that the Russians wouldn't dare to take us on if we were holding the line. We, some Western countries, were holding the line. There's a long way to go before we get to that, but that's the...
It's a very fascinating solution. So the general idea that was said here is that instead of implement or bringing them into NATO and implementing Article 5 that basically says if you attack one of our countries, we are going to cook you. You are screwed. You mess with my homie, we're going to jump you. Instead of that for Ukraine, they're going to place some of their people, some of their gang members at a certain point, at kind of the border point of Russia and Ukraine. And if Russia goes past that point and then they threaten the gang, man, they stepped into their territory. They fucked with the wrong people. And because they stepped in there to try to get to them, even though they're not with us, but you stepped on our territory to get to them, that means we're beefing. So I think that's very interesting of a solution, but the question is, how much of an incentive will there be for Western countries to take on that task, right? I guarantee that Donald Trump will not be sending any soldiers towards that kind of international line, right? I think you can maybe argue France. He brought up Germany. He brought up Poland. It really needs to be one country, but I don't think it'll be Americans. Super fascinating, though. I think it's an interesting solution. Regardless, I don't think Russia will buy it, but they won't be technically a part of Ukraine, but they do know the semantics behind it. And maybe they will consider, well, I know there's a reach around, so as long as they're not officially, I can find a way to get through it. Ultimately, I do think there's going to be ulterior motive when it comes to Putin.
The line of thinking, if there is to be a stable truce, then somebody has to hold that line. And it's a long line, 600 miles, 1,000 kilometers. If there isn't somebody holding the line, this truce won't hold. Because we all know the Russians, if they get the idea if they're given a ceasefire, they will be back for more. I promise you, I can promise you that Putin fully intends to take the whole of Ukraine at some time, unless he's prevented from doing so by significant power.
So if that is as effective...
That's another really good point, and that I don't think is considered enough. Like, people say, "Oh, let's end this conflict. Let's have the ceasefire." We need to be realistic. Unless there is actual guarantees of Ukraine's safety, Russia will try to do it again.